Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is the perfect storm, when circumstances converge to present all kinds of challenges that wouldn't have otherwise been possible without the synergy of circumstance. So we'll talk about that. It should be a good conversation. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. Welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Before we get started, let's take a couple minutes to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining stress, tension, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our hands together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, and allow all those sensations, including the tickling and tingling when you stop, to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome. Good morning, Robin. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. And again, welcome to everyone who's joining us. Today, we're talking about the perfect storm. And the perfect storm is when there is a convergence of several factors. And it seems often that they're in threes that create a system, or I want to say conflagration, but that's really fire. But this synergy of circumstance that amplifies each of those components exponentially. So in other words, where the whole is way greater than the sum of the parts. And I've noticed some interesting occurrences of this lately, and I want to talk about the opportunity that's available when these things occur. So in the work that I do, one of the things that I emphasize and have vortex, Robin says vortex, yes, that incredible energy that is amplified and amplifies. So in the work that I do, one of the things that I emphasize is that if it's coming up to heal. In other words, when we get upset, when we have disruptions in our lives, emotionally, physically, in whatever kind of context, these are opportunities to heal things that are underlying. And with that context, we can look at this perfect storm sort of thing as a magnified opportunity, like an opportunity, a big calling to heal something big. So recently there was a situation for one of my clients where they have dealt with rage for a while, just like these massive outbursts of rage. And we've been working on it, and they've been making amazing progress. And then all of a sudden, they had this massive, massive meltdown and expressed anger in a way that they hadn't expressed it since they were a teenager, where they turned that rage on themselves and just scratch themselves in, and not to bloody, but it was just the act of that in itself was very, very upsetting for them, because it brought them back to this other time in their lives where they just felt so completely out of control, and there was so much rage and frustration. So what had happened when we talk about the perfect storm was they got COVID. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that when COVID occurs, there are brain changes that are happening too. Just think about it. It's kind of obvious when we think about it. Our sense of taste and smell goes away, right? Our digestion can be really disrupted. Our sleep can be really disrupted. And what I've noticed for a lot of people is that our cognition, our thinking can get very, very foggy. These are all brain things happening, right? In fact, related to the limbic system, right? Which I want to discuss because I'm reading this awesome book that I think can make a huge difference for lots and lots of people. It's making a difference for me. And it was actually recommended to me by this client that has had these experiences with rage. So when we think about COVID, I don't think in the media, in the conversation around COVID, we don't talk about the brain changes that happen. But people get aches and pains, people lose their sense of smell and taste, people have foggy thinking, and also a lot of negative ideation where I've had people think about suicide and people just going into depression. And when I had COVID, that was something that I noticed too, is that my thinking went down this negative depressive path that I hadn't really been in for years. And that showed up during COVID, like this negativity and darkness and fear. And so let's just entertain the assumption that when we have COVID, there's brain changes that have happened. Or at least during that period, and people who have long haul COVID maybe haven't been able to recover from that, right? So that's one point on this perfect storm. It also happened that, kind of not deliberately, but because they were sick from COVID and weren't eating a whole lot, what happened was this person also stopped eating sugar and had previously had a pretty heavy reliance on sugar. Now, sugar is a very highly addictive substance. We don't talk about it in that way a whole lot, but there's a wonderful book called The Sugar Blues, and it talks about how we get addicted to sugar, and it changes our chemistry. The things that we ingest change our chemistry. And when we change our chemistry, it's also making brain changes, right? So this person had also at the same time quit sugar. And because they had been sick, they have legally used medical cannabis to help to modulate their mood. And they usually smoke it and they had not smoked for quite some time. So what's happening there is, again, a big chemistry change. So here you have this perfect storm of COVID, sugar, and cannabis, all making massive brain changes, right? And then, bam, there was this explosive and internalized or internally directed rage and frustration, which in itself was a traumatic experience because it triggered stuff from the past. So this person was kind of at their wits' end in this moment, and just like in a massive meltdown. And we were able to do a session and identify these circumstantial elements that were having such a profound impact on their mood and on their state. So now I'm going to talk about this book that I mentioned because it comes into play here. The tendency for this person was to attack themselves, to make themselves wrong, to say, what's wrong with me that I'm doing this, that I have this outburst. And there was a lot of self-blame and recrimination about it, without having realized all these factors at play that would impact their physiology and psychology. So the book is called Wired for Healing, and it's written by a woman named Annie Hopper. And she has done, and she actually was she actually experienced horribly devastating debilitation that included super sensitivity to chemicals and electromagnetic exposure, to the point where she could smell a chemical, like from a detergent or a laundry fabric softener or whatever, from an incredible distance. If somebody was wearing some kind of scent, she would go into convulsions. And she ended up having to isolate and just went through hell. And there are lots of people that have these kinds of really dire sensitivities. And the medical profession just doesn't really know how to deal with it, how to treat it. And through her work, she discovered that it seems to be that it's a function of a deep imbalance of the limbic system, which is a collection of elements in the brain, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and the hippocampus, as well as what is this other one? Anterior, I want to say cingulate. I'm still learning. But anyway, and all of these elements connect to our fight and flight response and our experience of fear and anger and depression. And what's interesting is that through this limbic system, rebalancing this brain injury is, she's categorizing it as a brain injury that can happen through emotional trauma, through chemical trauma, through physical trauma. What happens is that we end up in certain patterns of behavior that are not necessarily conscious, like where our body will interpret anything from the external environment as a threat. So a chemical that is in a detergent, for instance, or that's even in a perfume, all of a sudden the senses are heightened to such a degree that the scent of this is overwhelming, and it's interpreted as a threat and toxicity. And the body then reacts to that as if it's poison. So what's happened is that it's almost like, we've probably all heard the saying, "You're on my last nerve." So it's almost like the last nerve just got frayed, and there's no buffer, and the reaction to these stimuli on another than conscious level is just over the top, and people literally can die as a result of these reactions, that they're like extreme allergic reactions, anaphylaxis, throat swelling, epileptic kinds of seizures, and not to mention the fear thoughts and these deep channels of negative thinking and behaviors. And she has developed a program to assist people in repatterning through neuroplasticity, because our brains modify, our brains adjust all the time, not always positively, obviously not always negatively, but that we can repattern these pathways, we can recreate these pathways. And as a result of relieving this fight, flight, freeze pattern, we can actually start to redirect and rechannel and create new neural pathways. So I think her website is retrainingthebrain.com or .org. I'm not sure which, but it's really fascinating. So I want to talk also about a perfect storm that occurred for me. I have had a lot of autoimmune issues. That's why I have no hair. And I have had irritable bowel and food sensitivities, and things have digestive issues. Things have seemed to accelerate even more recently. And what I've noticed, it just came to my awareness recently, that I was more sensitive to stress than I had been, that I was really trying to kind of push away stressors, that I didn't have much resilience. I didn't feel like I was having much resilience. So the perfect storm for me was my wrist, breaking my wrist, working with a company that I had engaged to help me expand my reach in the coaching and consciousness communication arena, and a rental increase and message from my landlady. So like each of these things, interestingly enough, were their own triggers, right? Injury obviously can be a trigger, and it's a stressor, right? Because physiologically, and trying to navigate feeling, with an impediment, of course, that's a stressor. And each of these other things were stressors. And the interesting thing is, well, they all combined to a point where I saw myself being uncharacteristically grumpy, negative, isolating, depressed, just avoidant. I was seeing all these things happening over the past few weeks. And of course, all these things are relative, right? But that's what was going on for me. There's this perfect storm had converged, and I noticed this shift in my being, how I was being. And it prompted me to look more deeply. Like, here was this perfect storm. And in these times, it's easy to be immersed in that not positive state, right? It's easy to start turning it back on yourself and creating a downward spiral. What, thankfully, because I've been engaged in this kind of work for so long, when I noticed it, it was like, okay, I get to address this. And what I discovered was that each of these things were triggering something from the past that had been way more traumatic, like super traumatic from the past. But here were these three things that combined to trigger all these super traumatic things from the past. So it made this synergy of I don't want to over catastrophize it, but of catastrophe, like it brought back these other experiences that were very, 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 very highly charged. So going back to this notion of, if it's coming up, it's coming up to heal. Here was something that was so much in my face that I absolutely couldn't ignore it, which was good, right? Because we tend to, sometimes if it's not extreme, we just allow ourselves to continue coping, right? But it was big enough that I just couldn't pretend that it wasn't there, which was great. And so I've been doing some work, and I made these connections with these other events that had been really traumatic, and recognized that I had never given myself the opportunity to fully process those traumas. So I have been working really deeply on clearing this stuff, and this notion that it's not this notion that it's a function of a brain injury, also, like the physical things that are occurring as a result, like the whole litany of things that I named, to recognize that they're not individual conditions, but that they all stem from this one brain injury or brain mutation source. And so as I'm doing all this work, rather than getting concerned about each of the new symptoms that are showing up, I can go back to, oh, I get to heal my brain. I get to heal this pattern of fight, flight, adrenal overwhelm, et cetera, et cetera. I get to heal that, and it's going to bubble into all these other things. And so as I experience any of these symptoms, I'm able to say, oh, isn't that interesting? That's part of the symptomology of this limbic system dysfunction. And then I can be intending to be addressing the rewiring of the greater system that's then showing up in all these peripheral symptoms. So it's been really, really, really fascinating and super liberating to be able to connect the dots between current trauma and like, why is this getting to me so much? Recognizing the connections to past trauma, working through the past trauma and reframing it and addressing it, and allowing all of that to be part of this limbic system healing. So I don't know if that's Dido or if it's Sue, but welcome, welcome. It's great to have you here this morning. And so this treatment or process, it's a rigorous retraining. It's a rigorous brain retraining, and I'm not necessarily, I haven't done the program. I haven't dug into the details of it, but from the book that I'm reading, again, the book is called Wired for Healing by Annie Hopper. You can look her up on YouTube. There are a bunch of videos that she does where she talks about people that have all these intense sensitivities, but also people who have OCD and who have massive stress responses to things. I mean, she's working with people that have extreme dysfunction, and there's so many of us, myself included, that have conditions that map to this limbic dysfunction. And so if we can be retraining our brains, which we can, by the way, very effectively, then we can relieve all these other crazy symptoms. So people that had lost their sense of smell have regained it. People who had extreme sense of smell, for instance, and reactions to toxic chemicals were relieved of that extreme experience. All kinds of really, truly, seemingly miraculous transformations have occurred for folks as a result of this reprogramming that they can do. Again, I believe her website is retrainingthebrain.com or .org. But I highly recommend it. So Rosalind says, like Fitbit gadgets that gauge how you sleep, the brain therapy showing a screen of neural pathways would be informative for someone who wants to heal. So there, if you do something like neurofeedback, that's exactly what happens. You get to see the patterns in your brain as you're going through this sort of meditative experience. It's really, really fascinating. And it is creating literal new neural pathways. So Rosalind says, I heard the patient can see the screen of their brain while hooked up to probes, which parts of their brain not firing positive areas of the brain are too overactive for the fight or flight. That would be great for a patient to see. I've done that work, and it's really fascinating. And one of the things that I would so love to do is to have somebody hooked up, do the core connection work with them, and see the changes in the brain, because the change that through the core connection work, which has a lot of alignment from what I can tell to what Annie Hopper's doing, it's the transformation's radical. So the experience of fight or flight that people start with is gone at the end of a session. And the difference between my work and what Annie Hopper's doing is that you're supposed to be practicing this process that she provides an hour a day for 6 months, to be able to, at least an hour a day, to be able to really, really ingrain the new patterning. So anyway, it's all very, very interesting, and I'd love to hear from you if you check out that book and check out her website and check out the program. I think it offers tremendous hope and potential for folks that are suffering with things that medicine just hasn't figured out how to contend with yet. So anyway, that's it for today. So glad to be here with you, and I so deeply appreciate you. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel, and my Facebook pages as well. So Robin says, what's the book? The book is called Wired for Healing. Wired for Healing by Annie Hopper. And the website, I believe her website is retrainingthebrain.com or .org. Anyway, so again, as always, it is my incredible pleasure and privilege to spend this time with you, and I'm so grateful for that opportunity. Until next time, so much love.